Hello, everyone. Hope everybody had a good 4th of July. I am Cyrus. I am the team leader, local chapter of Strong Towns Las Vegas Urban Planning Organization. It is my job to not only bring advocacy, but to also debunk a lot of myths, answer a lot of questions, make sure that people are not misunderstood. It's been about 3, possibly 4 decades that we have been speaking out against sprawl, modern urban planning. Obviously, there's a lot of misinformation, myths, special interests, folks who have their own self-interest that want to obviously mislead, bring propaganda, perpetuate the status quo so that their special interests are constantly perpetuated. There's just no question about it. And yeah, I agree that there are some flaws with the so-called solutions, particularly smart growth. We've had plenty of issues where the radical environmentalists have infiltrated the movement. There has been opposition to similar efforts about 15 years ago. We've heard this thing, well, there's United Nations infiltration. They're trying to push this to control us so we can try to solve climate change. Now, obviously, strong towns mainly advocates for deregulation. They don't bring up climate change, and maybe that's why some people can argue that why strong towns was created over smart growth and new urbanism, which were, all 3 of them were organizations trying to fight sprawl, modern urban planning. However, the bottom line is that the status quo isn't working very, very well. There's just no question about it. And I wanted to really look at this article right here, which is called New Urbanists Want to Bulldoze the Suburban American Dream. And there's just so much flaws in everything. But let's take a look at what this commentator pointed out. Meanwhile, the cities that new urbanists idolize, such as New York, San Francisco, and Chicago, are collapsing under the weight of crime, homelessness, and deteriorating infrastructure. So he's quoting. However, what he replies, those cities aren't the ones that new urbanists idolize. They idolize towns, not hyperdensity. But see, what they're doing is they're trying to conflate the two. They're trying to distort what we have to say. Now, maybe there are some people who want hyperdensity. Our stance is if you want hyperdensity, if you want to build it, you should be able to do it. So let's go on with this article. Picture this: a 4-story residential building perched atop an artisanal coffee shop, a yoga studio, with micro apartments stacked like shoeboxes in the name of sustainability and resilience. And then picture this entirely: a master planned community where every house is a front porch. The streets are lined with picket fences. Everything looked like a normal Rockwell painting. Except if there's any few houses of worship, zoning codes are suffocating, and price tag ensures only elite can afford to live there. So I don't know what's this point. I mean, obviously, as you can see, new urbanism supports detached homes. There's 2 phases of new urbanism: ideology that masquerading as traditionalist, conservatives have tolerated for so long. And then you have high-density urbanism, where developers in cahoots with machine politicians that cram as people as apartment blocks. Now, again, yes, there are some factions within the movement. There's the environmental radicalists. There's all sorts of people. But we all have one thing in common. We are tired of the status quo, and we want to be flexible. If you want to build high density, you should be free to do that. Our system is designed in a way with codes, zoning laws, policies, subsidies that discourage that from happening. And it's not just high density, traditionalists in terms of urban planning. And I'll get to that a little bit later, even if it's low-rise buildings. Eliminating cars, personal space under the guise of environmentalism and a sense of community. On the other hand, you have faux traditional, highly regulated enclaves of celebration and seaside. Well, first of all, that's just a bunch of baloney. And you're spreading a lot of wrong, incorrect information. It makes you think that maybe you could take legal action against this person, but then again, don't get me started. Prohibitively expensive and ironically more artificial than the suburban developments and they criticize. Well, how are they more artificial and why are they more expensive? Now, again, this kind of does prove that we're a very flexible movement. There are people who still believe people should have space, single family homes. It's just the design of the urban environment is what we really disagree. And they're not highly regulated. The reason that they're still not dominant and very few have been built in the last 80 years is because we have codes, policies, particularly parking requirements, codes that mandate stroads that make Celebration and Seaside actually illegal to build. Despite their aesthetic differences, both forms of new urbanism share a common goal. They're re-engineering American life by discouraging home ownership. The planning and development approach, as the Congress for New Urbanism puts it, champions walkability and human scale design, but it's really about control, limiting choices, and creating a transient, economically development population that tilts politics permanently leftward. Oh, please. I mean, seriously, like traditional urban planning should favor conservatism. Walkability and human scale, what's wrong with that? How are they controlling? How are they limiting choices? In fact, they're really doing the opposite. Led by figures by Andres Duany and Charles Marohn, pushed by crony capitalist scholars. Now, first of all, Charles Marohn has been getting some heat by some of the anti-sprawl advocates because he has a lot of conservative views about that are not planning related. Andres Duany and another guy, one of the most anti-sprawl critics, also one of the champions about oil is going to be a more of a depleting resource, James Howard Kunstler, they've been interviewed by Tucker Carlson. And again, you want support from all sides so we can come together and get things done faster and more efficient. These ideas should not be partisan. But this is what these guys are trying to do. They're trying to lump you one side or another. So most likely there's division, there's distractions, nothing gets done. The status quo is constantly perpetuated. Okay? And by the way, Kunstler used to be more of a Democrat guy. But obviously it's a long story. The party has changed. New urbanism advocates for zoning reforms that restrict home building on the outskirts city centers and inflate the cost of housing. Now, where is it that in new urbanism that they're doing that? Now, smart growth, for the record, they do advocate for urban growth boundaries, open space preserves, which I oppose. Again, don't put words in my mouth. And I think a lot of new urbanists, strong town advocates, they don't support that. However, they're just putting words on their mouths. Let me tell you something. This is, in fact, the development of Celebration right here. It's fairly spread out. Many people might argue that this is really just sprawl. In fact, he's kind of saying at the same time it's even more artificial than suburban development. So he's trying to bash it in every angle possible. Is it like suburbia or is it not? Can you make up your damn mind? And by the way, you guys have to share this video to the author of this article. At the heart of this movement is a fanatical hatred of the automobile. They don't hate the automobile. They want neighborhoods to be car optional. New urbanists dream of a car-free America. Oh, please. Hello? There's a lot of streets and roads. There's parking. We just want to give people choices if they don't want to have a car to get around. This is insanity. And by the way, these people, they're not winning. Our movement is growing, regardless of what aisle you're in. Where individuals are heralded into public transit and forced to walk and bike, oh, come on. There's rooms for cars, regardless of their needs and preferences. DPC co-design founded in 1980 by Duany and Plater Zeidberg, his wife, firm behind much of the urbanist expansions, one gleefully tweeted, "We look for our car optional Miami." So they're literally twisting their words. Man, I feel like this is libel what this guy is doing. Cars optional, freedom and choice, which is not true. Our policies or codes encourage that. They encourage families to escape crime in urban centers. First of all, you can have traditional planning and towns in rural areas. I was just in Boulder City less than 24 hours ago going to a parade. It's in the outside of the Las Vegas Valley. It was pretty walkable, the historic core. There's a lot of small towns across America that you can do that. Access to better schools. Again, the crime has little to do with the urban center in terms of its design. It has to do with the fact with the policies that these mayors and these politicians do in the inner cities like San Francisco, Portland, and so forth. That's why new urbanists and their left-wing allies despise. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, getting rid of parking requirements and providing good design ideas where the porch is the center of the attention, not the garage, that's left-wing ideology, even though 100 years ago that was the norm. They yearn for us to be in dense housing and to be reliant on mass transit. Folks, I don't know what are you talking about, but this is Celebration, and there's full of single-family homes. I mean, this guy is just making points, and you can't even connect the damn dots. Look, there's larger houses and access to nature. What is this guy smoking, folks? Meanwhile, cities that urbanists idolize, such as New York, San Francisco, and Chicago, they're collapsing in the weight of crime, homelessness, and deteriorating infrastructure. Okay, they're collapsing not because of the urban design. Homelessness has little to do with urban design. In fact, there's a lot of corrupt NGOs, from what I heard, that perpetuate the unhoused people. Instead of addressing these failures, and by the way, the homelessness problem wasn't really a problem so much 30 years ago, 100 years ago, as we have now. And let's not forget, we have crime problems and homeless problems here in Las Vegas, and it's almost entirely sprawl. It's almost entirely car dependent. My gosh. And double down on the same policies: more density, fewer cars, obsession with public spaces that become magnets for vacancy and disorder. Excuse me, you have codes, you can have ordinances. Okay, now I agree you have to solve these problems, but the solution is not to build public spaces, it's to address the problems of crime and homelessness. Master plan communities such as Seaside and Celebration also saw the false bill of goods. They will walkable neighborhoods that will foster affordability in community. Celebration just south of Walt Disney Resort, of small town life, where home prices are nearly $620,000. Well, excuse me, the reason why they're expensive, are you out of your mind? Because there's a high demand to live there. Duh! There's a lack of supply. And the solution is to build more places like that, which a square foot price hovers around $332. In the small code zip code, arguably the showcase of new urbanism, the median sale price has surged to $1.1 million. Okay? The property selling about 500 square foot. These developments have shut down middle-class families. Particularly, they've become bubbles. Well, yeah, because again, there's high demand, low supply. The hypocrisy of new urbanism is staggering. James Kunstler, which I talked about earlier, open boasted about Greenwich, New York to complete with large garden orchard and chickens. Charles Marohn, founder of Strong Towns, resided in a single-family home of Brainerd, Minnesota, a quiet prairie town. And Richard Dryhouse, new urbanist financier, now defunct New Urbanist column, American Conservatives, opened multiple mansions. Well, excuse me, New Urbanism is about small town living. And in case if you don't know, they have a transect. The transect has an area where you have large lot homes. I can show it to you. It's high density for thee, but sprawling luxury for me. He doesn't get it. It's about the layout of these neighborhoods. Celebration, I just showed you, had large lot homes. It's time to knock down. And by the way, Kunstler is not advocating for high density. He was talking about oil becoming more expensive And because it's difficult to transport the goods and have the commutes to the urban centers, that we were going to move to the rural communities and grow food and have a more localized economic system. But of course, unfortunately, it didn't turn out as bad as he claimed it was 20, 25 years ago. But again, you have to understand, Kunstler, like a lot of these sprawl critics, they vary across the board. Now it's time to knock down these three new urbanist pieces of propaganda. First, we don't have a hard housing crisis. We have an artificial crisis created by politicians and developers to restrict the supply, inflate costs, to further solidify their Democratic voting blocs. Now, first of all, I mean, it's true that they do impose urban growth boundaries, which not every sprawl critic is for. Again, they vary. The answer is to cutting red tape, unleashing the free market to build more homes where actually want to live. But see, what's flawed about that argument is that the inner cities are also very expensive, and they can be more expensive on the outer suburbs. So the solution is to fight the NIMBYs, get rid of the zoning laws, and not just building out, but it's also to building up. Okay? Even here in Las Vegas, I live between the Palms and the Rio Hotel. When you have luxury condos that are very expensive, you don't just build homes on the outskirts like Henderson and Summerlin necessarily. You build more vertical towers. Okay? But again, that's not all that easy because there's profitability and so forth, permits. The report confirms that millennials are fleeing the city faster than a hipster from a chain restaurant. No, it's because the cities are so expensive and they're going to the suburbs because they're cheaper, because they have no other choice. The cities are not building enough homes. New York City is not building enough homes like they used to 100 years ago. A lot of the buildings the older historic homes would not fit to code. The rent control policies, a lot of the permitting, everything, zoning, especially in Queens and Staten Island, in New Jersey, makes it more difficult to expand homes. This guy is out of his mind. Secondary, contrary to what new urbanists claim, the suburbs are not an artificial contrivance foisted upon upsetting Americans. The result, people voting for their feet. Suburban life offers home ownership, safety, and stability. Now, again, there is some truth to it. There is some demographic flight. There is some wealthier people living in the inner cities. I get that. However, we're not anti people building homes on the outskirts and having single-family homes. We are against Stroads. We are against maze-like streets and cul-de-sacs. We're against parking requirements. We're against strip malls. We're against office parks. We are championing more of a layout like Celebration that has many and probably nearly all of the benefits that you get from a typical suburban development. We're just saying if you live in a tiny lot home or in a multifamily, you could just literally go down the street and get your errands done, not have to depend on cars, and not have to be suckered into these useless amenities like gated subdivisions. Conservatives should champion. Oh my gosh. By the way, I believe that precinct actually voted red because Florida has been shifting towards Republican. Yet this guy sneered the idea of single-family homes, is dismissing mansions and symbols of excess. Okay, folks, he's not against mansions. He's against McMansions. It's like saying, I'm bashing McDonald's, but I'm against burgers. No, that's full of crap. New urbanists cheered Houston lacked zoning laws as a perfect stage for their grand vision. Okay, so they're giving credit where it's due. But when given the freedom to choose, people didn't flock downtown, they stampeded to the suburbs. Okay, but that doesn't mean just because they live in the suburbs, they like everything about it. It's like just because people buy food at the grocery store, that doesn't mean they like the high fructose corn syrup that comes with it. Like George Carlin says, we have an illusion of choice. And we have a lot of policies that encourage all of that, or just people who are naive, who don't make good decisions. Okay? And We can argue that there are flaws with the free market, but that's a totally different time. It's frankly absurd that conservatives who are pro-family entertain the idea of jamming tiny apartments with no yards. Okay, first of all, these are people who have yards here, large houses. What are you talking about? Man, this is complete propaganda, folks. How are people supposed to raise their children in a 600-foot box? Okay, first of all, in New York, in Chicago, in Boston, there's plenty of detached homes. In Queens, in Staten Island. And they have mass transit that's much better. They have walkability that's much better. And not to mention, in Brooklyn, you have row houses, okay? Where kids supposed to play. Instead of these left-wing planners putting a dystopian vision, folks, this guy is trying to make our efforts partisan, and he knows he's just trying to pick everything he can, every microscopic point of view that he can to jam it as much as he can. In reality, the COVID lockdowns is that the information economy made living in the suburbs more affordable. Okay, well, they live in the suburbs because there's more housing available and the inner cities don't have enough homes because of NIMBYs. Remote work reduces the need of long commutes. Okay, well, first of all, remote work is actually reversing. Suburbs offer less crime, noise, privacy. That's not because of the design. That has to do with the public safety policies, the economy, the cultures, everything that happened. It has little to do with urban planning. Yeah, jobs exist in the suburbs. Well, yeah, not as much. And again, now he's bringing partisan points of view. The Obama administration fair housing rule to reshape suburban demographics. Now, again, his intent was different. Okay? He was trying to focus on demographics. Strong towns is not trying to change the demographics or push government policies, more restrictions. Strong towns is trying to remove the codes and policies that makes it difficult, especially with these NIMBYs, to build denser housing. If a developer wants to build denser housing, sell it, and make a profit, he should have the ability to do that. These initiatives sought to impose high-density housing. Now, you can say that Obama is not necessarily having the same agenda that we want to have. He's trying to push it. He's trying to hijack our efforts. Just because we sound the same doesn't mean we're the same enchilada. Effectively eroding local control over zoning laws. But then he admits that there are zoning laws or restrictions that you get in these suburban areas, or it could just be modern planned areas. Again, dense areas can be car dependent. Keep that in mind. The true objective was to fundamentally alter the political landscape by turning traditionally conservative suburbs purple and eventually blue. During the Trump administration, by the way, if you know, Trump is a builder of high-rises, keep that in mind, and he can build high-rises easier in a state like Florida and Texas than he can in New York and California. Keep in mind, Texas has more high-rises than the state of California, and Texas is a redder state. Texas is easier to build up and out than California, and actually hence why their 2030 census, again, it's a long story. There was an opportunity to dismantle the policies and defend the suburbs. And self-proclaimed progressive delighted developers profit from these changes, resisted efforts to repeal the rule. Now, what was the rule? If he was giving the opportunity for developers to build something different, that's different. But if he was forcing it, saying that you can go from forced single family to forced high density, well, they're both flawed. Developers should be flexible to do what they want. The right has mistakenly accommodated doctrine libertarians, new conservatives, and yes, new urbanists. But just as we expose the deep state and the fake news, it's trying to unmask new urbanists' left-wing assault on property rights. Again, there's left-wing supporters and there's Trump supporters who support anti-sprawl efforts. And anti-sprawl doesn't mean you're anti-outward development. These two things are not the same. The future of America is not a high-density corporatist nightmare. It's a spacious single-family homes where, well, it's not even liberty. Remember, the interstate highway system, the Federal Housing Administration. The list goes on, folks. The codes, the arterial roads. And actually, what he doesn't talk about is how one of the things that changed our system away from traditional urban planning was the traffic lights, because you needed all those lanes so cars can pass the intersection, 2 left turn lanes, 6, 8 lanes, all of that nonsense. If you had roundabouts, you don't need all those lanes. If you have fewer lanes, it's easier for pedestrians to walk along and cross the street. The pandemic has put new urbanism on life support. Well, I don't know about new urbanism, but strong towns is exploding right now. Now is the time to flick the switch. As conservatives, we must stand and defend home ownership, the pillar of American dream. This guy is out of his mind. So let me show you the slides and let me show you what we do, just in case, if you're just curious. So again, this is what we used to have. This is downtown Las Vegas. The grid street and slowly begins to change. This is what we used to have. You can see how the houses, the buildings are much different, the layout of the streets. This is what we have now. This is the alternative that we prefer. It's very simple. So this is a neighborhood in Las Vegas. It's a 20-minute walk, but that fence blocks the playground. It's insane, okay? You can see here, this is the layout of this modern sprawl system. Look at this. One large apartment complex, one way to get out, half a mile long. Okay, very difficult to, and these are not spacious homes. These are multifamily housing. We're not a fan of this. We prefer this, even though they reuse the same floor plan. It's very, very, very simple. And again, Las Vegas is one of the densest urban areas in America. Smallest lot sizes in the country. You can see all this right here. Still very, very car dependent. And remember, this is a worldwide problem because this is Dubai. This is what we're really, really opposed to. Road, which makes walking, getting around very difficult. So we separate slow versus fast-moving traffic. We reduce the number of lanes. We have a median, buildings right up front, bike lanes, everything we need. Okay? We're not supporting of the middle. We support the left and the right. It's very, very simple. High speed, low speed, not middle speed. Obviously, roundabouts help. Safer, more efficient, fewer lanes, and so forth. And you can see here that more and more developments are starting to look more like that. It's very, very simple. But this guy, he wants to twist everything, spread propaganda, mislead, do all of this nonsense. And let's take a look. This New York Times article, Why America Should Sprawl. What a load of BS. Yes, everyone knows I have issues with the New York Times. It's not because they hired me. Today's example, Why America Should Sprawl. The world has become reckless growth, but it's time to fix it, but the country needs more of it. Now, more outward growth can increase the supply of homes. But that's not the only way. You can go vertical. Okay, sensational headlines are another way, 2 steps ahead. No argument there. He is certainly right how single-family zoning has made it impossible to build dense housing in cities. But it would have killed this author to at least consider the sprawl has negative consequences on car dependence, with at least poor health outcomes and other negatives. In fact, when he mentions transportation only as a side, when he discusses the original growth of the suburbs in the 1920s, and again, of course, you can say that mass transit costs way more than it should compared to other developed countries. Sure, there's things that we can fix. But the original growth of the suburbs of the 1920s, first railroads and automobiles changed that, opening the gates of suburbia of the middle class. He writes, railroads is one thing. They move people more efficiently from one suburban town center to an urban town center. Cars are the opposite of that, causing congestion, pollution, stress, and inefficiency. Lots of parking that's needed. Later, when discussing the Texan boomtown, he says not many local jobs. Most of Princeton's residents commute out of town for work. They mostly commute by car because there's no transit. And building cities of 50,000 people in the middle of nowhere, he concerns that there is concerns out of hand. The traffic and its views of passions being consumed by new tract homes sort of seems opponent of sprawl with of their heads. But this is how cities are built, through chaotic, uneven process, mix of homes and jobs and infrastructure, constantly shifting, never quite in balance. Instead of endless sprawl, it's better to think of Princetown of economic nodes of broader region. The relationship to Dallas proper is akin to Newark's relationships to New York, Oakland, and San Francisco. No, Newark and New York City and Oakland, San Francisco are connected by vibrant transit networks, which carry millions of people daily without congestion. Princeton, Texas is sprawl. But don't listen to me. A well-documented Times critic listened to Freemark, which says 1 out of 5 people I want to be in an urbanist foxhole in Duffy's War on Cities. Now look at this. Not a single time in this article glorifying the need of sprawl to address the affordable housing crisis, as there's a mention of vast transportation costs of sprawling living patterns, nor there's a mention that sprawl is directly linked to disinvestment to urban cores. It was nice to see that Bloomberg City Lab pick up on our report. More than 2,000 people oppose Safe Street in Australia. Looks like the DOT, council members, and local advocates have to do better to debunk bike-lane myths. Speaking of myths, check out what happens when business district transforms streets into favor of people of cars. Okay? Let's take a look right here. So they're debunking this thing that how America should sprawl. Now let's take a look at this article right here. We need outward growth but not sprawl, debunking the same New York Times article. So the New York Times supports sprawl. And let's not forget, New York Times is a pro-democrat organization. So anybody who says, well, you know something, anti-sprawl, they're just a bunch of Democrats, which is very misleading. You can have support of strong towns that are from all over the spectrum. New Urbanists, you name it. In fact, one of the bluest counties, they're so pro-NIMBY. Marohn County, you can go down the line in California. Their land use reporter, Conrad Daughtry, wrote a piece that America should sprawl. Okay, let's just... The headline is a vast Dallas subdivision with garages in front of house. Automobiles is the only feasible modes of transportation. Okay. First, I want to acknowledge that Daughtry make good points. So they're giving him credit. Overregulation and poorly conceived land use laws has brought a housing crisis. Consider the trajectory of California. In the 60s and 70s, where California added 6 to 8 million residents, and fruit trees were being ripped out in space for ranch houses. Its legislature passed a flurry of land use environmental laws to preserve agricultural land and containing development in metropolitan area. Those laws were celebrated for saving farming regions like Napa Valley and marine headlands, but they've also made it difficult that even environmentally friendly projects like a small apartment building next to a commuter rail line in San Francisco could be tied up with lawsuits and add millions of dollars. So Daughtry is right that we've always had outward low-density developments. And he cites the historian. The fringes of ancient Rome were known as, well, they had suburbs outside of their walls. And they are so in many large cities, London, Paris, and New York. Growth has always pressed outward, and the buffer zone is nearly fully urban nor rural. But this wasn't a permanent condition. Over time, the busters were filled and were incorporated into the city core. Upper East Side and the Hyde Park section of Chicago, at one time there were exurbs, but now they've changed. And even yet, Bill Fulton writes, sprawl is not the outward thing, it's outward expansion. That's what I pointed out earlier. So he talks about how sprawl was invented in the 1950s. Zoning codes separated uses and housing types and spread them even much further apart through setbacks and other minimum lot sizes. More importantly, traffic engineers abandoned the connected grid of streets that was a foundation of real estate development for centuries. And this is Denver in the 1940s. Red. Development occurred in an outward branching, but it wasn't conventional sprawl. Zoom in these areas, you'll see a street grid. Development in the 1950s and beyond became so squiggly and disconnected that soon becoming completely automobile-oriented sprawl by the late 1960s. Go to any Denver neighborhood in the 1970s, you cannot get from the single-family homes to connected areas without a car, unless if you're some kind of bike rider. The drive-only pattern was intentional because the post-1950 planners envisioned the cars as for all practical purposes. Biking and walking were for kids, but pretty soon even children couldn't get far on the bikes because going to school in that motive plummeted. The Denver neighborhoods that are older remain walkable and bikeable. Daughtry acknowledges that zoning is a factor, but in only terms of densifying sprawl, because most of today's suburbs were built after zoning and land use laws, like parking requirements, became more widespread and stringent, and it became harder to fill in the closest suburbs with density the way older cities did. Right. Okay, so again, you can see that, for an example, a lot of these suburbs, as they got older, you could not build denser housing. They're notable for designing car-free cul-de-sac in Tempe, Arizona. This Ticos design, okay, that wants to build something different. Responded to Daughtry as an alternative, if we wanted to make the creation of walkable communities in greenfield context, an equal playing field, the market would decide for us. The National Association of Realtors shows that 50% of American households want walkable neighborhoods, but it's just hard to build them now. I would add that street design and networks are even bigger factors than zoning. Land use laws are changing, but it's the streets that are hard to change. And traffic engineers continue to favor disconnected, strand-oriented patterns, of course, roads, arterial roads, and so forth, which, that's the main problem, because if you don't solve that problem, well, then all of a sudden, all of your goals will not be met, because again, you need to do that in order to get efficiency of getting around by foot, by biking, eventually giving you transit, and of course just getting around by car more effectively. A few other points need to clarify his take on sprawl. Over the past decades, dozens of cities and states have to spur construction by passing laws to make neighborhoods denser, by removing single-family zoning rules, reducing permitting times, exempting housing, establishing neighborhoods from environmental rules. So again, environmental laws make it harder to build denser development, not just outward. This is harder to do, but not impossible. Peter Calthrope, which I've known him for almost 20 years now, and others have pointed that the vast potential for housing in low-density commercial corridors. The author is not wrong that the development on the fringe is not the same as the cities. Okay? During talking about something different, it's not sprawl, but real new cities like Daybreak in St. George, or the other ones we've talked about, Celebration in Florida. Many have proposed, such as California Forever, which is outward development, but traditional, more walkable, has been pushed down by overregulated Golden State, and others are in the works. Okay? Because again, California makes it hard to build up and out. New cities can be built incrementally. But if we go back to the way cities were designed before 1950, that means connected networks of streets and zoning codes can be based on mixed-use neighborhoods. The New York Times' perspective piece is the perspective that sprawl has contributed to the lack of affordability. The ring of sprawl around every city makes massive urban lands 10 times or more as large as historic cities. This makes new development more difficult and drives up the buildable land and raises the cost of transportation. And there's health problems. If we want to change the reality, we have to require a new mindset, and there's got to be code reform. So it's very simple. Like when you sprawl on those expensive limited lands of California, well, you reduce the amount of land available. You can't build up easily, so you have shortage of housing, right? And plus you're car dependent. That adds on to costs. Daughtry is right. We need outward expansion, but we don't need sprawl. We used to have new development that was more efficient, connected to previous neighborhoods, and more sustainable. So it's very, very simple, folks. It's not that difficult to achieve. But then again, these people, what they do is distort, they're misleading, and a lot of times we can't get real alternative solutions. It's not that difficult. And I did a lot of lobbying for this about a couple of months ago in the Nevada legislature. You live in something like this in detached homes, and you can shop in something that looks like this, very similar. They can be close together. But anyway, you let me know what you think. I've been constantly talking a lot for the past 40 minutes now. Thank you guys so much. Please do what you can, spread the word, and make sure we have a better urban planning approach.